So just establishing a upright and comfortable meditation posture. And actually, it doesn't have to be upright. If we're in a meditation hall, I would ask you to be upright. But if it's more helpful for you to lie down, just do that. But just be aware of the tendency towards sleepiness. And closing the eyes or just lowering the gaze. And bringing your attention inward. Even as we separate ourselves from the visual world, there's a natural tendency to notice other sense experiences more strongly, the sounds and sensations in the body, even smells. So notice what stands out rather than starting your meditation by kind of trying to control what you pay attention to. Just see what calls to you. And then letting the body soften. Relaxing the shoulders, softening the belly. Let any tension dissolve from the face. It's almost like we can feel gravity more distinctly as we let go of these points of tension or holding, tightness. But once there's this awareness of the body established, the senses, it's helpful to then notice as well any mood or emotional background, any feelings that present themselves. And just as with sensations, not trying to control or do anything with them, just allow. There can be this subtle or not so subtle resistance to feeling emotions, the fear. And if we trust in mindfulness, in the capacity of the mind to be present and hold with balance what we're feeling, then we can open and allow this energy to come through, to be felt. And we can breathe with those feelings. Just as the chest rises and falls, so we open to the felt experience. All of this is just applying the practice of mindfulness to the present moment. The sensations, the body, to the mood, the mind state. There's a quality of receptivity, softness, kindness. So much of what we experience in mind and body, and even in the world around us, is unsatisfactory, not the way we would like it to be, what the Buddha called dukkha. Mindfulness gives us a way to hold and be with these realities. That really take them out of the realm of problem. Help us to just see them as what is, not focusing so much on the liking or the disliking or the wanting. Just being with. In a sense, just seeing the okayness of imperfection. The breath also gives us a way to step back or step into another mind state so that we don't have to just stay enveloped in the dukkha. We see that, we feel that, we accept that. Then we keep just turning to the breath, to the present moment, to the calming, centering energy of breath. All right. I am finally going to get back to one breath at a time. Um, and where we've been, I diverged from the text in step 11 when we got to Metta, the loving kindness teachings, and did a bunch of classes on my book, Living Kindness, which, if you are interested, will stop being on sale in the next couple of weeks on, well, it'll stop being on sale publicly as it goes into Shambhala's possession, and they're going to publish it next year in a new version. But I just ordered 50 extra copies so that, and if anybody wants a copy, thank you, Steve. Yes, for that marketing. I ordered 50 extra copies. So if over the next months someone goes, oh, wait, I heard about this book, I want to read it, they can just get it from me. So, it used to be that I would do these things where there would actually be people where I was teaching. Their bodies would be in the same place. And then I could have books, which would be like these things. And then they could buy them at the event. I know it's hard to explain if you haven't heard of it, but that's how it used to be. So maybe next year that'll happen too. I was thinking as we were sitting, as one does, about don't know. There's, the great Zen kind of, it's kind of Korean Zen, I think. Don't know. I mean, I learned it from Sansonin, but don't know mind, and how, before the pandemic, you could sort of like plan stuff. Like, oh, I think like I'm going to do this probably in a couple of months or next year or whatever. Now it's like, I don't know, maybe if it's possible, it could happen. Don't know. Which is, as they tell us, it's a good thing spiritually to not know. But as for our mental health, I'm not so sure. So I'm gonna read from One Breath at a Time. In step 11, the section called Metta. I'm going to read some parts of this. It actually goes on for several pages. If it's true that resentment, quote, destroys more alcoholics than anything, unquote, as the big book says, that's the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous for those who are not privy. So if it's true that resentment destroys more alcoholics than anything, then metta, or loving kindness, may be the most important practice for addicts and alcoholics. Metta is a complex practice because even as we try to arouse this sublime emotion, we must face those aspects of ourselves that are less than sublime. Before we can even begin to practice loving kindness, we typically work with forgiveness, as I described in steps 8 and 9. On the other hand, just in practicing mindfulness deeply, metta can spontaneously arise without any formal practice. Yeah, which I think is a really important point, and it's something. If you ever have sat with Ajahn Amaro, who's a very well-known Buddhist monk, he doesn't really teach metta, and he says because to him, practicing mindfulness it cultivates metta inherently, which I think that's, I don't know that that's exactly true. I think it's kind of important to have some understanding of the kind of kind of principles of Buddhism, the broader principles of Buddhism, meaning sort of understanding compassion, that, that which kind of then takes us back to suffering, right? So the Buddha kind of obviously points to the pervasiveness of dukkha, of suffering, in subtle and not subtle ways, and that because we all suffer and that we all seek happiness, that therefore anyone who's suffering really deserves love or compassion. And so if we are practicing mindfulness in a wholehearted way, that is, we are being fully present for our experience, and we see the suffering that arises inherently out of being a human being, that we naturally then will have compassion for ourselves if we are kind of oriented in this way from this Buddhist viewpoint, which isn't really Buddhist at all, right? It's just humans just sort of being attentive. And thereby, we will also, in mindfulness practice, see the universality of our experience, that as we penetrate into our experience and look closely at our experience, we start to see that it's not unique to us, that the dukkha that arises for us must also arise in all beings. And therefore, we begin to have compassion for all beings. And all of this really just arises out of being present for our own experience with, as I say, this kind of framework of understanding it that the Buddha gives us. I mean, I'm not sure that every ordinary human like us, like uninstructed worldlings, as the Buddha calls us, would make all these connections automatically. But when we're given that kind of framework, and then we're asked to sit and sit and sit and be with our experience and watch our experience, it starts to unfold. It starts to become very apparent that loving kindness is the natural and wise way of responding to life's travails, which is just to say life. So it is travailful. Many people practice metta as their main practice, and entire metta retreats are taught in which people do this practice instead of following the breath or watching thoughts. I have never done one of these retreats, and that is still true today, 17 years later. Partly because I saw that no matter what kind of practice I did, metta would arise. I didn't have to cultivate it specially. On the other hand, wouldn't hurt. For addicts and alcoholics, I think it's probably most important that we practice metta in our daily lives. Developing a loving and compassionate heart, learning to react with kindness rather than judgment or anger, is critical both to our sobriety as well as to our serenity. My tendency to react negatively to others was brought home to me on an early retreat. One afternoon, I started to notice the sound of someone repeatedly swallowing in the meditation hall. The silence on a retreat is so deep that such a sound is quite audible in a room full of 100 meditators. Hearing that sound was unpleasant, and I found it annoying. Why don't they stop swallowing? I thought, what's wrong with them? I tried to let go of my aversion to the sound, but I had difficulty not being judgmental. The next day, I was in a group interview with Jack Kornfield. When someone brought up the swallower, everyone agreed that it was annoying and the person should stop. Jack said, you might try to practice compassion for this person. They probably don't want to be swallowing. Of course, they didn't want to be swallowing over and over. What had I been thinking? My own self-centeredness was driven home to me. The idea that I can consider the problem from someone else's point of view broke something open for me. A few years later, I was working for a magazine distributor in Venice Beach. That's in California, for those who aren't familiar. It's not in Italy. And we were talking about one of his other employees who spoke harshly and critically a great deal of the time. I was complaining to my boss about it when he said that whenever someone talked or yelled like that to him, he just remembered that that person was also talking like that to themselves inside their head. Instead of being frustrated or angry with them, he felt compassion. When he said this to me, it struck me as a wonderful insight. Of course, we speak the way we think, which, making a habit of bringing loving kindness and compassion to mind in daily life can shift our entire outlook. Both those moments, it just, were really helpful for me. And it's funny how certain moments stick with us. That moment with my boss in Venice Beach, that was in 1983. And I it's, yeah, just another like piece of wisdom, right? When people talk that way to you, they talk that way to themselves. What a concept, and what a great sort of gateway into forgiveness. So let's see. I'm going to talk a little bit about bringing loving kindness to meetings. The annoying people in meetings. Here, I'll read this later section here. Of course, it's one thing to be compassionate to strangers, and once we get in the habit, it's not that hard. But what about those we love? With them, it's more difficult to disidentify with our feelings, and this points to one of the paradoxes of Metapractice. Typically, we think of love as a very personal, intimate expression of human emotion. But with Metapractice, we move to a different level of love, to the impersonal, unconditional level, the level that's not responding to the other person or being, but rather drawing from our own inherent quality of heartfelt caring and openness. While our intimate relationships are typically reciprocal arrangements in which we co-support each other, with Metta, there is no expectation of a return for what we give. In fact, with Metta, we discover that the giving itself is the reward, is the return. It is the reward. Okay, I guess I'm going to read this. As I mentioned in step 8, my feelings for my wife can range from love to boredom to frustration. Some things never change. While it's powerful to expand the heart to love all beings, directing it toward one being can be a challenge. Just as prayer helps me set my intention, Metapractice does the same. It reminds me to bring this loving kindness back into the practical realities of my life, back to the person upstairs drinking coffee in her bathrobe. If I can't love her, if I can't offer her my metta, then how authentic is the rest of my, quote, unconditional love? Metta, loving kindness, is a rich and layered practice, exploring its boundaries, expanding the boundaries of our own self-imposed limitations is an ongoing practice. I include metta in virtually every period of meditation I do. I practice metta for myself, for my friends and family, my teachers, politicians, the hungry, sick, and dying, for animals, bugs, fish, birds, for the earth itself, and for the entire universe. The universe is a great sponge of metta, absorbing all the love we can give and giving it right back to us. I don't know about that. It's an odd image, but Universe as sponge. All right then. I don't always love reading from my own books, particularly the personal parts, but I don't want to just completely avoid them. So, but I do. You may notice that generally I look for the straight Dharma pieces to read. I think the stories to me are part of the narrative that helps people to relate and makes it a good read, as we say, but it's not always something that the author wants to be speaking aloud, especially when their wife is upstairs drinking coffee, but she is not in her bathrobe, I'm pretty sure. So I will open it up and we can have some discussion about metta or whatever else you would like to talk about this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you might be, all the ships at sea. Oh, hey. Oh, hi, Deborah. Go ahead.
I particularly like the part about metta in meetings, because in my recovery, I just, even though I'd been to AA meetings with my recovery, but after I left, I just kind of stayed in the sanghas because that felt so much more comfortable. And then my counselor suggested that I go back to AA just for a more broad approach. And I said, oh yeah, but I don't care for the war stories. And sometimes they drag on and on. And she said, well, bring Metta to the meeting. And I was like, oh. So I've added a couple meetings to my recovery, and it's been so helpful because, every once in a while I get a aha from the meetings that I usually associate with my sanghas. So it really did work. It does work for me. So thank you for recognizing that.
Yeah. Thank you. And Buddhism is not a treatment program, even though we can use it as part of it. And when I just feel that it's really helpful to be around people who are in recovery and whose primary focus is that, at least for that period of time. That there's a lot of wisdom in 12-step meetings. And you do have to sift through other stuff oftentimes, but that's kind of the price of admission, I guess. Who had their hand up first, Steve or Dolores?
I'll wait.
Wow.
Good morning, Kevin.
Hi, Steve.
Just a couple of quick comments. I just love this section. I just went through it. I've been practicing a lot more metta, and I wanted to send metta. I have three things that I wanted to make a comment on. I started a gratitude list this weekend, and number one, send metta to in this public forum in the Sangha to Angela for all of her help and assistance in setting me up for the upcoming retreat. Now, I'm one of these kind of guys that has a tendency just to be a pain in the ass. I got to have all my ducks in a row. I got to be really organized. I got to get the information. And I don't want to wait for it. I want it now. I'm kind of impatient that way. Mm-hmm. And the loving kindness that she showed me and helping me organize, getting things together and taking care of business. And I started to think to myself, God, you're such a pain in the ass, Steve. And I started beating myself up over it. And she just actually turned all that around. And we had this really long conversation on the phone and just had a great time getting to know each other. So, she was practicing loving kindness in return, and it just helps reinforce my own metta. The other thing was I was feeling a lot of gratitude towards the weather myself. And when you brought that up, I'm just going, it's finally cooled off a little bit. And then this morning, when you started talking about needing to take a break to do some writings, I can only tell you that the gift that you give all of us with now, for me, I've read all of your books more than once, and I'm going back through one breath at a time because I get confused with God. So, you know what? It's a service for you to be able to take the time off. This whole format, this Sangha, is so special to me. I spent so much time in other, refuge recovery Dharma, AA, NA, FA, and it's like, this is different. You're teaching us, and we get the chance to listen and go through these writings. So I don't know. I mean, I could spend the whole day asking you questions about everything, but I'm just grateful that you're taking the time off, because I can't wait to read your next book. And this is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. Your daily reflections book, and for you to say that was a struggle for you, it's my top book that I read out of my 6 devotional books every day.
Wow.
So blessings to all of you. I send all of you metta. Thanks to Angela. Thank you for letting me share. That's all I have to say right now.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'm really, really grateful to Angela too, not to, get her blushing, but just showing up and doing this out of her own generosity is a beautiful example of service and love. And so really enjoy it. Thanks, dear. Okay. I'm gonna just Dolores, go ahead now.
Thank you. And I want to say ditto also to Steve. Please don't stop reading from your books and giving examples. I just love it. I just love that. So thank you for that. Learning so much from you. Yesterday, I have a hard time getting around, and I'm just starting to drive again and walk with a walker. Thank God for those chairs in the stores that I could ride around in. However, I'm in the store and I can't find this item, and I'm asking this man behind the counter where it is, and 3 times he pointed to where it was, and 3 times I asked him, would you please show me, when he was pointed again. So obviously he wasn't going to show me, and I get this resentment inside of me, and I'm going to report him to somebody, and just breathe in, breathe out. I just, from you and Thich Nhat Hanh, I just breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And things began to change with the realization that he's from another country. Maybe they do things differently there. Like just all that thinking, like it subsided, and it took my anger started to subside. And I did find somebody to help me and whatnot. And I had some feelings towards the man. I didn't know what it was. And I think it was what you're talking about. I think I had some metta, even though he wasn't doing what I wanted him to do. It was like, love him, just love him. Like even the word forgiveness, what is there to forgive? If I wasn't judging him, in the first place, the man was just doing his job in the way that he does his job. And I think that I experienced some of that. So thank you so much for reading this part of the book, and explaining metta in a way that I didn't even realize what metta was. But I had tenderness for the man instead of, I'm going to report him to somebody. That's miraculous.
Yeah. Thanks, Dolores.
Mm-hmm.
Nice to hear. Gabriella.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you, Kevin. This is such a lovely part of the book. And I'm laughing because I remember being at a day long one time, and we were doing loving kindness, and it was a walking meditation. So you walk and you say a phrase, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many people, and we were going like this. And I remember thinking, may you be happy. Oh my God, this person walked right in front of me. May you be safe. Oh, Jesus, aren't they looking where they're going? May you, like every step. And then my mind would come in, and it was hysterical because here we are practicing loving kindness, and every other thought was, they're in my way. And
Yeah.
what a remarkable, and the way that I look at that is, I remember I was telling, and this is, I've gone through this many times, and being in 12-step rooms, and people will bug me. People will bug me in the rooms. And I remember my sponsor saying, well, if people aren't bugging you, then you're not going to enough meetings. And I'm like, oh, thank God, right? But going in the rooms, and it doesn't matter which room, is rife for practice. And one of the things that I've been working on with the loving kindness, I almost do loving kindness almost every day, because my critical mind, my self-judgment is so profuse. I mean, it is just incessant, but also the resentment part. And what it's showing me is not only where I build resentment, but also how judgmental my mind is. Mm-hmm. Everywhere there is a loving opportunity for loving kindness, the whole other side of that is some form of judgment. Yeah. And whether it's self-judgment and self-criticism, or whether it's somebody not doing something that I want them to do and my controlling behavior, whatever it is, but it's just this mirror for judgment for me, or comparing, right? Mm-hmm. So I love this part because it's just, it's really, I think the Metapractice has been one of the most instrumental parts of my recovery, because there were so many ways that I could look at how I was doing it wrong and how it wasn't going to work for me. In 2.5 years, I think I stood up as a newcomer trying to get sober every day, and it was always going to be some reason why it wasn't going to work for me. So I'm just so grateful. And thank you so much for tapping on this project, or talking on this topic. And thank you so much for going back to writing. Absolutely. So grateful to be here.
Thank you. Thanks. Nice to see you. I also think, I think it's also helpful for me anyway, to put like judging the critical part of the mind in a broader framework. Is not just like a bad thing, but as having a value, and that it's more about that it can manifest in very constructive ways, that critical thinking, for instance, is a really important thing. And sometimes there's not enough critical thinking. And indeed, in spiritual circles, there can be not enough critical thinking, which is really one of the motivators in a lot of my writing, is to kind of question the received wisdom or the conventional wisdom. And so not to necessarily, just to see that it's really when judgment is tinged with hatred, rather than it can be colored with wisdom, and it's actually one of the flags in the Tibetan prayer flag symbolizes critical thinking, or like, yeah, that kind of so it is a spiritual quality but it depends, like it's about intention ultimately, right? So that way it doesn't become like, oh, it becomes more self-judgment, right? Because I'm judging. It's like, oh, that's just, and of course the negativity bias of the mind anyway, that's a normal human thing. Again, not personal. It's not your fault. So Ken, hi, nice to see you. Like, I see you were up there with William Shatner, who's
yeah, Bill and I are old friends.
Yeah, I see he's going to space actually, so really excited for him.
First, I want to just bow to your decision to take care of yourself as a writer. As a writer, I appreciate that, and I used to tell my writing students that writing is about creating a space from which it can emerge. So I salute you doing that. The other thing I wanted to mention is, really quickly, the big book of AA suggests that we pray for people who we resent. And Metta is like tailor-made for that. And when I am in that spot, that's what I do. I do Metapractice for people who annoy me.
Yeah, thanks. Really, really good point. And as you say, like another one of those perfect parallels between Dharma and recovery, and Dharma, Buddhism, and the 12 steps. Like they suggest the same prescription. So there must be something in it, unless they're both wrong. I don't think so.
I'm still here, so it must work.
I think it works. Yeah. Thanks for that reminder, Ken. Nice to see you. Cam, what's up?
Hello. Hey.
Hey.
Kevin, will you go through step 11 and point out, make explicit where you're drawing the emphasis to loving kindness, living kindness, and what else might be in that step that's also important? Can you do that?
Right now?
I don't know. Yeah, the next half a minute.
Well, I mean, so one of my strategies in writing one breath at a time was to say, what Dharma teaching can I fit into this step, so that I can use this step as a launching pad for that discussion. And so step 11, because it explicitly says meditation, I was like, okay, this is a place where I can use step 11 to talk about meditation, all different kinds of meditation that I want to talk about. So that is a pretty simple, it was a pretty simplistic idea, it was just like, I need to find places to do these put these teachings in. So ask the question again so I can.
What else is in there? What else is in step 11 that you
Right.
think is important?
So, we haven't gotten, I don't think, so step 11 says, we sought through prayer and meditation. So we sought, and I have a section on seeking, right? The idea that this is a process of seeking. And we sought through prayer and meditation. So then, of course, I address prayer and I address meditation to improve our conscious contact. So I talk about what conscious contact might mean, that mindfulness is conscious contact with God as we understood him. And I think I've addressed sort of God more in the earlier steps in step 3. And of course, then I wrote another book that's about God. And praying only for his knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So then there's a section, the next section actually is called Whose Will? So it's addressing the question of the will of God. And actually the next 2 sections, because clear comprehension, I kind of make that, show that as a way of thinking about God's will. And I do think that's a really important question, because it goes back to step 3 as well. We turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. So there's always this question, if we're working with the steps, of how are we supposed to know what God's will is for us? And so I think that's the last really important question in this step is finding something that makes sense to us in terms of understanding, well, what do I need to do? What choices do I need to make? What's my next, what decision am I going to make next in my life? And so we'll talk about that in the coming classes.
Okay, look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, well, we can stretch out a little bit here, Jim.
Thanks, Kevin. I can make it quick.
Yeah.
2 things. The first, when you started talking about needing to take time for your writing, my first thought was, oh crap, he's getting ready to cancel Tuesday meetings. So thank you for not doing that. that I can breathe easier now. The other thing, I love this conversation about having metta towards other people and understanding where other people are coming from. It reminded me of one of my favorite George Carlin quotes when he said, "The dancer appears crazy to those who can't hear the music."
Mm.
And I just thought that that was brilliant. A nice way to reframe that people are operating on their own assumptions, beliefs, values, and their behavior makes sense to them. It may not make sense to me. So it was a nice connection to make. Thank you.
That's beautiful, Jim. I really like that. I don't think I've ever heard that before. It's wonderful. Going back to your first comment, my motivation isn't entirely to get out of work, but also, I really want other people to do this kind of teaching. And Anne and Debbie are two people who've been around and doing this and working towards being teachers. And this is a way for me to give them a little bit more of a platform. You don't know that I met Anne at the first Buddhist Recovery Network, at the founding of the Buddhist Recovery Network in 2008. So our relationship goes back a long way, and she's been so around this work and involved in this work for a long time. So I really want to see them coming out and taking this role. So yes. So fun, nice to see everyone. And this Friday will be the Spirit Rock class. So if you happen to show up in this room, or if you want to just drop in on this room and see if anybody's here, you can tell them that they should go over to the Spirit Rock link that is also on my website, and it's also on the Spirit Rock website. But that starts a little bit later, runs a little bit later, so it starts at 7:15. And I don't know what I'm going to talk about, although I have some ideas, because I've been, I might talk about some of the things I've been writing about, actually. It's very likely. So in the meantime, still space in the retreat. It is starting to fill up. And that's really like the big thing in our coming. Oh, I am teaching a day long for Sacramento Insight. It's on my website, on my calendar. It's on the 16th. So just a, Buddhist recovery day long. I think that's the only other special public event this month. But coming up towards, the adventurous time of year for people in recovery. When I worked in an office, I used to call the Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the sugar season. And those of you who've worked in an office know what I'm talking about. It's like everybody just brings in junk to eat. So it's a really vulnerable time for people with eating disorders, and it's a really vulnerable time for people with drug and alcohol disorders. So time for us to hang together close and take care of ourselves. So take care.